So, all right, everyone, we are at 7 o'clock. I'm here with Amy Schoenhoff from Mindfulness in the Heartland, and this is, the last in this series, except for, the upcoming 8-week sessions that Amy's got teed up, for those that choose to avail themselves of that. But this is the last lesson, the Heart of Mindfulness, which should be good. We've got, it looks like, a handful of people with us. Glad you're here. So with that, I'm going to hand control over to Amy, and you can take it away.
All righty. Well, first off, I just want to thank you all for being here this evening. First thing I want to ask you guys to do is, if you I'll give you a moment to do so. I'd really like to get you to get a pen and a piece of paper in front of you, because we're going to do an exercise later on in this presentation that you're going to have to write some things down, okay? And you'll understand more later. But if you could have access to a pen and a piece of paper and get that in front of you now, so you don't have to do it right in the middle of the presentation, that would be great. Okay, and I'll just keep talking.
So
I do want to, yes.
Just real fast, we've got Greg, and then we've got somebody, it says Counselor Connect. Who's that? Who are you? You've been unmuted. Let me unmute manually.
Yeah, hi. So Counselor Connect is me. I'm Riti. I'm from India. So yeah, I work with children, and so I thought this would be a good opportunity to learn something different.
Well, that's very neat. Are you in India as we speak?
Yes.
That is very, very neat. Holy
Awesome.
cow. I've spent believe it or not, I've spent a lot of time in India.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I went to the junior command course in Mao, and then I was stationed at the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi for quite some time. So I love India.
Okay.
So very glad you're here. This is very neat.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. The magic of being online is that we have this opportunity to connect with people all over the world. That's amazing. Well, glad you're here. So as I said, please have some paper and a okay, now maybe you can hear me. So as I was saying, just make sure you have a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper in front of you for the exercise that we'll do later, okay? And I'll just get right into presenting. So let me see, I'm gonna share my screen and turn my camera off. Mike, you might wanna do the same as well.
Yes. Thank you, thank you.
Okay, and so I'm gonna go into presentation mode. Just give me a second here. Now do let me know if you can't see this, Mike, okay? But I'm just gonna launch otherwise.
Oh, you're good. It's looking good from my end, so.
Okay. Okay, so first I just wanna kind of just talk about this picture, because actually this picture speaks a lot to what we're gonna speak about today. And as you're aware, this is a welcome mat that usually sits at the front entry of a home. And I think metaphorically, the heart of mindfulness, or the heartfulness of mindfulness as it's also called, is this idea of creating an inner abode or an inner refuge for ourselves. That this is a large component of learning mindfulness, that a large component of mindfulness is about this inner abode or refuge that we are creating for ourselves in the midst of bringing greater awareness into our lives. And I think it's important to distinguish the difference between a house and a home, okay? Because like a house, can be a building that somebody resides in that has a roof and has some walls that provides protection, a certain level of safety and protection that not being in a house would provide. But a home suggests kind of a leveling up of the abode or the space we inhabit. So when you're making a home, you're providing warmth within that space, that a home provides not just safety, and even sometimes, a home doesn't just provide safety, but it provides a sense of place, a sense of safety, a sense of warmth and caring. And so when we're talking about the heart of mindfulness or the heartfulness of mindfulness, it's really about the cultivation of that refuge, that sanctuary, that place that we can abide in within ourselves, and building that home not just for us or not just for the parts of ourselves that we like, but for all the components of who we are. The things we don't like about ourselves, the things we struggle with, to provide sanctuary for all of those pieces of ourselves. And as we build that for ourselves, then also welcoming other people into this home in terms of opening our hearts. When you're a guest in somebody's home and their home is warm and welcoming. So as we cultivate this internal dwelling for ourselves, then we can also externalize this quality of home in our friendliness and care and concern for those who stand outside of us. So extending that friendliness and warmth and care and compassion externally as well. But we begin inside. We begin with the inner dwelling, okay? So mindfulness is not just about cultivating awareness. As you may remember from previous, if you've been on any of the previous webinars, we've talked about mindfulness is about being in the world in a particular way, paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment with an attitude of non-judgment. And that piece about non-judgment is really where we start to build upon this idea of heartfulness. Now, there's another definition, or there's John Kabat-Zinn kind of speaks to this idea of heartfulness in another quote of his. He says, in Asian languages, the word for mind and the word for heart are the same. They look the same. So if you're not hearing mindfulness in some deep way as heartfulness, you're not really understanding it, because compassion and kindness towards oneself is intrinsically woven into it. You can think of mindfulness as wise and affectionate attention, okay? So when we're talking about mindfulness, we're not just talking about being in the present moment. We're talking about being in the present moment with a certain quality of attention and with a certain attitude, or we're learning how to cultivate a certain attitude in terms of how we orient towards the present moment. And as I mentioned in the other webinars, these definitions of mindfulness really rest upon these three pillars of attention, intention, and attitude. So I'm going to just kind of break these down a little bit as they relate to this idea of heart or heartfulness. So when we talk about this pillar of attention, mindfulness is really providing us, like learning the skills of mindfulness, developing awareness, is really providing us the freedom to choose where we place our attention. We learn through formal practices of mindfulness that we have this capacity to focus our attention, expand our attention, and to direct our attention, right? So that the formal practices of mindfulness are really teaching us how to develop this capacity. And through this capacity of attention, we can kind of widen our experience of what, or widen our awareness of what we're experiencing. And that's how we can learn how to be more aware of thoughts that we have, what we're experiencing in the body, and what we're feeling in terms of feeling, tone, or emotion. You know, we get to kind of refine our experience of these points on the triangle of awareness through this capacity of attention, the refinement of this capacity of attention. And the 3 benefits that we receive from mindfulness is, I mean, we receive many benefits, but the ones perhaps more relevant to this conversation is this ability to focus on just one thing. You know, mindfulness provides us with the capacity to gather the attention, to really bring our awareness together. It also, over time, as we spend more time with it, we can start to see where we have habits of thought, habits of behavior, and seeing how these things are tied together in terms of experiences that we have and how we respond to them. So it really puts mindfulness really helps us to put a spotlight on our habits. And through that, it provides us with choice as well. Like, the thing that arises out of this is this capacity to have some choice and freedom. The other thing that mindfulness kind of gifts us with is this understanding this truth of impermanence, that whatever is showing up in whatever moment we're in, knowing that this too shall pass. You know, that everything is coming and going, whether we're talking about feelings that we're having, or emotions that we're experiencing, or thoughts that are arising, or bodily sensations we're experiencing. All of these things, all the things that comprise our awareness, go through the process of change. They're never, nothing ever stays the same. And that's true in terms of what's happening internally, but also gaining some awareness that that is the truth externally as well, that there's a universality to this idea of impermanence, both within and without. Things are constantly shifting and changing. There is no stationary thing that we can point at and say, this will never change, because all things are going through a process of change, right? So these are the things we start to understand as we develop this capacity of mindfulness. And the thing that's important to notice is that, you know, mindfulness gives us choice. That rather than being wrapped up in habit, ways of being or doing, or even feeling, you know, our habits of mind and habits of behavior can actually shift, you know, that we don't have to move into knee-jerk reactivity. Mindfulness provides us the space to actually consider our response. So that provides us with a great deal of freedom in terms of how we're going about living our lives. And with freedom, I think in terms of what we're talking about tonight, with that freedom also comes a sense of responsibility. So this idea of heartfulness, to me, is really coming out of this sense of when we have choice, we have freedom, and then to some degree, we also have responsibility for ourselves and what we do. It's no longer about anybody else. It's no longer about what other people do. You know, we recognize our self-agency, and so we can start making choices about how we want to be in the world and refining how we want to be in the world, getting clarity around what's authentic for us and how we're going to manifest that stuff externally and internally in our lives. So the second component I want to talk about is this idea of intention, or an intentionality. And I kind of, in this vein of heartfulness, we can talk about it as setting the compass of the heart. And when we're talking about intention, we're talking about what the motivating factors are in terms of what's driving our thinking and what's driving our behavior. You know, what is the fire that's in us in the moment that's leading to the behaviors that we're engaged in. And so I want to talk a little bit about I want to talk about this idea of motivation from a brain-based place. So I want to talk about, you know, how does motivation work within the development of the brain in terms of how the brain works. And I'm not talking as a neuroscientist. I am not a neuroscientist. But I want to talk about in terms of our current understanding of the brain, in terms of how it operates in relationship to motivation, because that's tied to intention. Okay. So there's this term called the neuroaxis of the brain, and this has to do with really the scaffolding of the brain. If we were to think about the brain from kind of an evolutionary development, that there's the scaffolding that has occurred within our brain as we've evolved into who we are today as human beings. And at the bottom of the brain is what they refer to as the lower or reptilian brain, the older areas of the brain. This is where our regulatory system is located in the brain. You know, this is where the autonomic nervous system is. So many of the systems of the body that just take care of themselves are housed in this lower reptilian brain. It's also the oldest structure in the brain. And then on top of this is the area called the mammalian brain or the midbrain. And what's housed in this area of the brain is the limbic system, which is the home for our feelings and our memories. And then above that is the most evolved part of our brain, which is that neocortex that sits on the top. So that's the top structure, and that's the newest part of our brain. It's responsible for executive function, our judgments and decision making, and our ability to understand feeling and emotion, like where our centers of empathy are in terms of understanding facial expressions, really playing off of what we recognize in other people in terms of what they're experiencing. It's where our perception lands. So our brain is really kind of evolved in these layers. And when you think about this structure of the neuroaxis of the brain, the lower areas of the brain are the ones that are, as I said, the oldest, but they're also less plastic, meaning that they're less able to change and adapt. Whereas the cortex, the newer area of the brain, actually has more plasticity to it. So it has the capacity to change in relationship to experience. The other important thing to know about this neuroaxis is that the lower levels have more direct control over the body because they're associated with, like the brainstem is associated with the regulatory system. So it's more directly linked to the bottom, and it's actually, or to the body, and it's actually what information from the body comes through to make its way into the brain. So the lower levels of the brain have more direct control over our bodies, whereas the upper levels are more plastic and able to adapt, right? So there's this sense of the lower levels actually help to adapt, or excuse me, the lower levels help to orient us in terms of the information that they're feeding from the body into the brain, and they also have the capacity to energize us. So that's kind of like the arousal system of the brain comes up through that lower area. Whereas the upper area, that newer area of the brain, can inhibit the lower area. Okay, so it has more control in terms of an inhibiting factor. And there are two important areas related to motivation in particular within the brain. There's the anterior cingulate cortex hub, or ACC, and it exists in that area between the midbrain and the cortex. Okay, so it sits right in between this area of the upper cortex and the midbrain, and it's responsible for kind of our effort or control in terms of it has the capacity to kind of cool the lower areas of the brain. It has this sense of regulating our thoughts and guiding our behaviors. and it has the capacity to fulfill our intentions. And why this is important is that for many of us, when there's a lack of awareness, many of our motivations, the things that are guiding and directing our behavior, are sitting below the level of consciousness. And when this ACC becomes important is when we can bring awareness to our intentions. Then we start to have some control over what's motivating and driving us, as well as this ability to kind of cool down the kind of lower level arousal that may come up and make us more reactive. So the other part of this hub is the area of the amygdala that sits in the midbrain. And it's the part of the more reactive, bottom-up energy of motivation, right? So it's that fight, flight response that comes up from the amygdala and moves us into action. So it's more tied to kind of survival-based behaviors. It's oriented towards opportunities and threats, and it shapes as well our perceptions and appraisals, our intentions and judgments of other people, okay? So these two centers, the amygdala sitting in that kind of mid region of the brain, and then this anterior or ACC sitting in between the midbrain and the cortex, can work in synergy with each other, but they can also work in opposition with each other. And so when we're thinking about what's motivating us, the more awareness that we're able to really develop in terms of our intentions and how we want to be and be authentic in the world, then we can start to really have some, once again, greater control over kind of cooling down the reactivity of the amygdala and start to make more deliberate decisions in terms of what's driving us and motivating us. So it's just a way for us to bring greater consciousness into how we're behaving and shaping how we want to respond, okay? So the next piece I want to talk about is the idea of attitude. And we're kind of moving into this area of this quality of non-judgment. Like, what does that look like as an attitude? And when you think about this, it's really about inclining the mind to lean in a certain direction. That as we develop this capacity to be aware, to be more mindful, to be more in the present moment, to notice what's happening, that we want to start inclining our mind towards things that align with our intentions. And we start to have a better grasp over this, and we actually start to have a greater capacity to manage this with awareness. Now, left to its own devices, our mind really operates in this mode called, it has the propensity to move into what we refer to as negativity bias. You know, we're wired to be more anxious, more vigilant, and to pay more and more attention to negative information. Like, that is how our brain is wired. And there's survival value to this. You know, we didn't get to where we are in our evolution because we weren't looking out for ourselves. It's because of this hypervigilance that we have the capacity to operate in that's really kept us alive and has allowed us to evolve. Unfortunately, though, this quality of the mind to kind of lean towards the negative, this natural propensity of the mind to lean into the negative, can actually make us more anxious. It can actually intensify unpleasant emotions, highlight our failures from the past. It can downplay what we're capable of, and it can set us up for thinking that the future is going to be worse than it already, you know, it sets us up to believe that the future is going to be worse than it probably will be. And you may have some experience with this in your own life, you know, where your mind leans you into, you know, spins you into a cycle of worst case scenario thinking about any particular thing. And you find out that you were probably 100% wrong about what you thought might happen. You know, our minds are not accurate in its predicting of the future, right? But this is negativity bias at work. And the thing that I think is really interesting about negativity bias is, although it may keep us safe, that is not the same as being happy. You know, safety and happiness do not necessarily correlate with one another, right? One does not equal the other. So if we rely too much on this negativity bias and don't recognize it for what it is, we can be leaning into feeling negative emotions a lot more frequently and potentially engaging in behaviors that are as a result of this negativity bias without realizing that we have some choices about whether we lean into that or not, right? So what we're doing as we're learning these skills of mindfulness is we're inclining the mind, is how I like to call it. Another metaphor I like is this idea of pulling weeds and planting flowers. And what this is really about is attending to the positive, learning how to develop feelings, thoughts, and actions that are aligned with positivity to balance out this natural leaning of the mind towards the negative. And there's this great quote by Rumi, when you go to a garden, do you see the thorns or the flowers? And the invitation is to spend more time with the roses and the jasmine. So this idea that you go to a garden to see the flowers, not to look at the thorns, not to look at what's wrong, what might possibly happen that could go wrong, all the ways it's not being done correctly. You go to admire the beauty of the garden. So when we notice ourselves leaning into those qualities of the mind that are more negative, fear-based, anxiety-based, you know, that we can start to meet that with something else. And so that we're actually, if you think of our own minds as a garden, you know, to start tending to this garden of the mind. And mindfulness helps us to do this. We start to be able to notice, you know, where are the thoughts that pop up that are negative? You know, what are the things that show up in my mind that keep me unhappy or anxious? You know, and starting to attend to the mind with wholesome inclinations, things like generosity and kindness. And beginning to work with the body and the mind in a way to develop these wholesome qualities of the heart, while also uprooting the unwholesome. So we can really look at mindfulness as not just a training for the mind, but also a training for the heart. We can use these skills that we're learning with mindfulness to begin to kind of, in a sense, purify the mind, to make it a beautiful garden that we wish to inhabit, to plant the flowers of goodness, to be reminded of our goodness, our wholesomeness, the things that make us feel expansive and open in our bodies. And this does not mean that we're trying to control the thoughts that arise. It's where do we place our attention? Where do we dwell? Where do we consistently spend our time? Okay. And what's important to remember here, you know, we talked about this upper level, this upper area, the upper area of the cortex of the brain, the newer area of the brain, and how it's more plastic, that it has the ability to adapt and change. And this changes through experience, right? Experience influences structure, which influences function, which influences perception. So as we have greater choice, as this mindfulness allows us to start seeing how the mind operates, what we feel in our bodies, the emotions that we walk around with, and starts to see all of these relationships, how they work with one another, how they work to our advantage or disadvantage, how they make us feel. You know, we can start putting other things into experience, that we can use formal and informal skills to help enhance positive experiences, which over time will have influence on structure and function and perception. but it is a training, it is a pathway, it is work that we have to do, it's attention that we have to give to our experience. It's not just going to happen. It requires attention. And that's what mindfulness can bring us, is the attention to attend to these pieces of ourselves, this quality of the mind, and to start influencing it. So let's talk about some informal heartful qualities. And these are more attitudes that we can begin to meet ourselves with to kind of soften the harshness within us, okay? So these are informal attitudes really of mindfulness that really start to kind of lay the groundwork for this heartfulness that we're going to be expanding upon. So one of these is this idea of non-judgment, to get out of the space of evaluating life as good or bad or right or wrong. You know, to notice the qualities of the mind that lean into that. So noticing thoughts that are aligned with judgment and evaluation and criticism, to be able to see those, but to really start to get some space on them, to be more of a witness to them rather than being tied up and wrapped up in them. Another attitude that we start to embrace is this idea of beginner's mind. And this has to do with recognizing impermanence. You know, this idea that things are constantly moving and changing, that nothing is static. And with beginner's mind, it's simply seeing each moment as its unique experience. So not laying the past, what's happened in the past, on top of the present moment. To really see each moment as its own unique expression of life and attending to this moment as if it's the only moment. Patience, this idea of not trying to rush or further things along. If you were to think of it as patience is being able to allow a flower to bloom of its own accord, at its own time, at its own rate, when it's ready, right? We can't force a flower to open. Patience allows us the capacity to be present with a flower as it blooms. So this is another one of these qualities, these attitudes that we're trying to develop in ourselves through our attitude, this attitude of patience, of just allowing things to unfold in their own time and knowing that things do unfold in their own time. We don't have to push them along. Trust, really learning how to be our own expert and trusting ourselves. This is kind of a core, well, at least for me in my life, learning how to trust ourselves and have self-agency is so important in terms of being authentic and relating to ourselves and others in an authentic way. It's learning how to listen to and trust that inner voice, to trust what's true for us, and knowing that it doesn't have to be the same for everybody, but really learning how to listen to and trust ourselves, which can be a real challenge for some people, but it's one of these things that we're trying to cultivate. Non-striving, moving out of the space of always trying to get somewhere else, you know, really allowing ourselves to be with each moment without trying to achieve or get anywhere. Letting go, to stop grasping at the things that we want and push away the things that we don't. So really getting familiar with this idea of recognizing that we will have unpleasant experiences and pleasant experiences, but we let go of trying to hang on to pleasant experiences and stop pushing away unpleasant, because we recognize impermanence, that these things are just going to come and go. So just allowing things to come and go. And then finally, acceptance, softening to our experience rather than resisting it. Once again, this idea of allowing, being present with, allowing things to be as they are. And that's not to say that we're becoming passive to everything that happens in our lives. That's not what acceptance is. But it's acceptance that whatever is happening in this moment is just the results of conditions that are present. And then working with them as skillfully as we can. And perhaps recognizing that changes do need to occur, but that we don't have to push up against this moment. So the more formal practices of this kind of heart opening have to do with, this development of what I like to refer to as a boundless heart. A heart that is open, that is soft, receptive, that allows things to come and go. And there are formal practices that we can do and learn that can teach us to be more resonant with this idea of the boundless heart. There are 4 in particular that we learn in the process of, or in this path of mindfulness. There's loving kindness meditation, compassion meditation, joy meditation, and equanimity meditation. These are all formal practices that we can engage in to kind of help with this opening and softening of the heart. And the thing that I think is really interesting is that we start with loving kindness, because loving kindness is really what awakens love in the heart. It's what really allows the heart to begin to awaken with love. And then when love meets suffering, so when love meets suffering either in ourselves or in others, it's expressed as compassion. And when this quality of love meets happiness in ourselves or in others, it's met as joy. And the great equalizer to these 3 kind of heartfelt feelings is equanimity. And equanimity is once again founded on this idea of impermanence. It's this kind of neutral, open relationship to whatever's happening. Okay? You can think of it as the freedom from the push and pull of pleasant and unpleasant. It's a sense of neutrality. But what's really interesting about equanimity in relationship to these other 3 qualities is that if we didn't have equanimity, loving kindness, compassion, and joy could lead to attachment. That we could be swept away if we didn't have this balance of equanimity, this kind of neutrality of equanimity. And without loving kindness, compassion, and joy, equanimity can turn into detachment. That it can become so neutral that it loses a sense of heartfulness. So these 4 qualities together are what are required for this boundless heart, this softening of the heart, this receptivity of the heart. That we need this stable balance of equanimity in relationship to these kind of heart-opening practices. And the thing that ties them all together as formal practices is that typically we practice them focused on 5 individuals. And it's a repetition of phrases. Each one of these formal practices is a repetition of phrases that we say to ourselves, a beloved, so someone we're close to and love, a benefactor, a familiar stranger, and a difficult person. But we always start with ourselves and a beloved. We always begin these practices by bringing our attention to someone who's easy to love and ourselves. And we do these repetition of thoughts, we visualize, and through this process, through the formal practices, we transmit feelings into ourselves. And we generate feelings of loving kindness, feelings of compassion, feelings of joy, and feelings of equanimity. So we're really allowing these heartfelt sensations to really reside and resonate throughout our bodies. I kind of like to think of it as allowing the cells of our bodies to absorb these boundless heart qualities. So that's the formal approach to the opening of the heart, the heartfulness of mindfulness. So what I thought we'd do tonight to kind of get a sense or a flavor of these practices is I wanted to walk us through a bit of a reflection and then a meditation. And this is the part where we're going to need the paper and pencil that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to exit out of presentation mode for a few minutes and put my camera back on. So I'm going to guide you through a bit of a reflection, and then we're going to take some pauses so you guys can write down some notes for yourselves. And this is strictly going to be for you. And then we'll use what you learn in that exploration to do just a short meditation, okay? So what I'm going to invite you to do is get comfortable in whatever seat you're in. And if you're comfortable doing so, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. And if you'd like to, I'm going to encourage you to maybe place your hand over your heart just so you can feel into this area of the body. So with your eyes closed, if you're comfortable doing so, I just want you to take a few minutes to just settle into your body, feeling your hips on the chair beneath you or your feet on the floor. It's really grounding into sitting, noticing where you feel that in your body. And as you start to settle into your body, I'd just like to invite you to feel your breath moving through the body. You might even imagine it like as a gentle caress of the breath moving through the body. And seeing if you can allow for any softening in the area of the heart. Just noticing what things are like in the heart right now and seeing if there is any sense of tension, just seeing if you can soften that a little bit. And when you're ready, I'm going to invite you to ask yourself a question to yourself. So, and the invitation is to ask yourself, what do you personally really need? What do you really need in your life right now? And something that you need consistently in your life. You know, what do you need on a daily basis as a human being to feel fulfilled? This could be things like peace, or freedom, happiness, connection, whatever's true for you. Just allowing it to arise in your heart. What do I really need on a regular basis? What do I need to feel fulfilled? And just allowing whatever answer comes to just allow that to come up without judging or evaluating the answer. What do I need to feel fulfilled? And when that answer comes to you, I'm just going to invite you to open your eyes and write down what came. You know, what showed up as this essential need that something that you needed for fulfillment regularly as a human being. What was that word or phrase? Just write that down for yourself. And then once you've written that down, I want to encourage you to see if you can write it as a wish for yourself. So saying something like, may I be and whatever that need was that arose. May I feel. So some examples might be if, you felt a need for freedom. May I feel free. Or a need for kindness. May I be kind to myself. Just whatever words for creating a wish for yourself might be. Writing down that response as a wish for yourself. Okay? Hopefully I've given you enough time. And when you're done with that, I'm going to invite you to once again take a seat and maybe place your hand over your heart and close your eyes again, and we'll do another inquiry, another reflection. So as you're ready to settle in again, the next question is, what do I need to hear? What words do I need to hear from others? What are words that fill you up, that fill your cup? And this may be a little more challenging because it really does require a certain sense of vulnerability to be really honest with ourselves here. What are the words that you need to hear? It may be phrases like, I love you, or I'm here for you. I've got your back. You're a good person. What are some phrases that hold you up and support you? And just opening that heart, that door of the heart, and just allowing whatever's there to come through. If somebody could whisper words to me of support, what would they be? What words of support do I need? And so if something has arisen, taking a moment to write that down. What words of support do you need to hear? And then seeing if you can turn that into a wish. Something like, may I know that I am loved. May I know that I'm a good person. Just taking the words that came, that you were able to pull out of yourself and turning them into some sort of wish statement. May I know I'm lovable. May I know I'm not alone. So our next step, hopefully that's enough time for you, but hopefully you've come up with at least one phrase that could be supportive to you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do a meditation using one of your phrases. Okay? So as you're ready, we're going to settle in to our seat again. Shut down the eyes if that's comfortable for you, and just take a couple minutes to orient to being in your body as you sit. And as you're ready to do so, just take one of the phrases that you were able to draw upon and just silently repeat that phrase to yourself. And really allow yourself to drink it in. Drink it into your heart. Drink it into your cells. Allow it to really resonate in your body. Give yourself permission to feel these well wishes or this well wish. Be the source of your own fulfillment. And just see if you can be present with whatever's showing up for you right now. And if anything becomes too intense or overwhelming, always feel free to open your eyes. But if you can, stay with these warm, loving well wishes. And when you're ready, I'm going to invite you to feel the body again as you sit and the breath moving through. And when you're ready, opening your eyes, taking just a few minutes to look around the room that you're in, reorienting yourself to the space you're inhabiting. Perhaps noticing and naming a few objects in the room or some colors. And checking in with yourself. Notice how things are right now. And now I'd like to open up the floor. If anybody would like to share about their experience with that practice, how that went for you, what you noticed.
Anybody?
Okay. Well,
Well, gee,
we don't have.
Yeah.
Somebody want to share?
Let me unmute. Let me make sure. If anyone wants to chime in, please do.
This is Greg. I really don't want to go into the personal,
Sure.
For sure.
but I do think that I see the value of being the source of my own fulfillment,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed the exercise. So thank you for sharing that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. This may be a little too heartfelt for a webinar, and I get that. I totally respect that. So let's just move forward. I do hope you found some value in it, and I hope that you found some words that really have meaning and resonate for you, all of you. And know that this doesn't have to be a formal meditation. You can take these words and pin them up next to a mirror to remind yourself that this is what I need. This is the fulfillment I'm seeking, and I can give this to myself. I can start to come home to myself, that I can start creating this home for myself. And this is the beginning. This is where it begins, with me, in my heart. So I just encourage you to really, I'm sorry?
This is Glenn Bimley.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
Amy, Mike. It gave me a different perspective of myself, going back and looking at that, and made me come to accept some things that I probably have put away for a long time.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah,
I appreciate it, brother.
thank you. Thank you very much, Glenn. And
You're
that's the
welcome.
beauty. That is the beauty of these practices, is that they provide openings that a lot of other things don't. And I will speak to a personal experience that I've had working with heart practices that really kind of highlight this. So I'll just do my own sharing here. I have a person in my life who I care very deeply for and value my relationship with. And by their nature, they're a pretty critical person. And so I spent many years in this relationship, really kind of buying into that person's judgments and assessments of me as true. You know, I really, they fit a narrative that I already had, so to say. And as my own awareness has developed and grown, you know, and I've worked with heart practices, you know, I've started to look at that relationship that we have and how to meet, as I've recognized that, like, I don't fit that isn't who I am, and recognizing that their expectation of me is not something that I can realistically live up to. You know, I've had to attend to these heartfelt practices with that knowing. And I immediately went into offering in my practice loving kindness to this person as a way, I thought, as a way to soften kind of the resistance I was starting to give back to the relationship as kind of my own personal understanding grew around this. And I was talking to somebody about it recently, and they said, have you offered yourself any loving kindness in this situation? Have you given it to yourself? You've spent time giving it to this other person, but have you given it to yourself? And it's like, wow, I really haven't. And that seems so obvious as you bring it up. So I've started to orient more towards loving kindness towards myself in this dynamic, this particular dynamic. And what I've noticed is the softening, in terms of softening towards myself and the reality of how it feels to be under that scrutiny all the time, has really helped me to start saying things that I've needed to say, rather than just like, whatever, you know, discounting, but really being able to speak up, to have some ownership for, like, no, that's not going to work for me. Like that, to start to build understanding for that person has been the result of me attending to how it feels to be oriented towards that way. So I just want to give you a personal example of how, when we orient differently and provide ourselves with some kindness and friendliness, how that can start shifting things that we may not have been able to see when we're focused on the other person. And not to say that we don't need to extend loving kindness to other people. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's that there may be times when we also need to give these things to ourselves, maybe even before we give it to somebody else. Okay, so I just want to put that out there. Just a couple more minutes of time. Just a couple more things I want to talk about real quick. I'll do my best to be fast. So let me go back into this presentation. So the other thing I want to talk about that's really important here is this idea of the wings of acceptance. And this is about, like, not sugarcoating experience. There's like, I don't know if you've ever heard the term of spiritual bypassing. You know, that's like when people slap a happy face on everything, you know, when they try to put a positive spin on every experience you've ever had. And it can become really, there's something to be said for the process of acceptance, right? So this is really about integrating our experience, that it is not necessarily skillful to just slap a happy face of positivity on every experience we've ever had, that sometimes the path of acceptance or the path of healing requires inner work. it requires some compassion, either towards ourselves or other people. That healing is not just about saying, I'm good, it's all over, I'm safe now, and that's it. Sometimes what needs to happen, especially when there's trauma involved, is that there's a process of integration. And so what mindfulness can help us do is to stay aware of the experience that we're having while also bringing in compassion. So really attending to the suffering and easing the suffering, that is a path of acceptance. So when we talk about this quality of heartfulness, it's not, I don't want it to sound like this idea of happifying everything or bypassing everything. It's really about, it sometimes can look like a process in coming to acceptance, okay? And our mindfulness and compassion can lead the way in that process. Okay, so I want to say that. And then I just want to briefly touch on some of the benefits of heart practice. In terms of research that's been done on heart-based practices, it's mainly been focused on loving kindness and self-compassion. And there are some empirical evidence that loving kindness practice can increase positive emotions and decrease negative emotions. It can increase the symptoms of PTSD. It can decrease bias. It can decrease biological or slow biological aging. It can increase our sense of social connection. And self-compassion, there's research to suggest that it can reduce anxiety and depression. It can lead to greater happiness and life satisfaction, better relationships, and greater motivation. And then finally, and there is a link to these PowerPoint slides that you can download. There are some resources here, some books that you might want to consider picking up to learn more about these heart-based approaches to mindfulness, how mindfulness and heartfulness can be woven together in your practice. So that's kind of it for me this evening. I do thank you all for being here with us, and I hope this was helpful to you.
Amy, I appreciate it. As always.
Thank you.
Sometimes, in the briefing, in terms of achievement and, some things that resonate with me, obviously, are you tend to be very teleological, target focused. It's our nature, especially military people. All right, hey, this is my mission. So on one hand, you want a sense of purpose. On the other hand, you don't need to be achieving every moment of every day. And to feel that, hey, if I'm not, then I'm not progressing, that can be counterproductive. So those are some little, that I've taken away. Now that said, you always want to be doing good things. But yeah, I know there's always this dichotomy, I think, in people. You want to, on one hand, be successful and be productive and this and that. But when it detracts from your sense of well-being, I think that's what you need to be mindful of, right?
Right, and you can bring your values along in all of that journey as well. Like, we don't need to lose sight of our values as we do these things. Like, what do I say is important as I go towards achieving all these things, and not losing sight of that, right? Because we can get to the top of the mountain and be like, oh, but I left my life down there.
Right. No, exactly.
I left a big part of myself down at the lower, at the last edge.
That's right. Or, you have this great achievement and, they say, life is a journey, not a destination, right? So you finally achieve, all right, I made it, and you're like, did you enjoy any of that? I don't remember any of it. I was just too busy grinding, and you're like,
it's running through the world.
What's that?
Yeah. I had a chief master sergeant. He constantly would respond to people, remain rigidly flexible.
Yeah, that was a wise drill sergeant.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, everyone.
Amy, thank you, as always.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Blessings to you all.
Absolutely.
Thank you much.
Thanks.
May you have a blessed evening.
We'll see you
Thank
guys.
you.
Stay safe out there. Okay. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Good night.